So there are a couple of things I wanted to talk about tonight. One was just real briefly, I wanted to address Elon Musk's threat to censor X, or Twitter as we used to call it, based on this bizarre interpretation of certain words and phrases that many Israel supporters seem to have, and that Elon Musk at least claims to have bought into himself. So let's just take a look at what he said. So Elon Musk says a couple of days ago, as I said earlier this week, decolonization from the river to the sea and similar euphemisms necessarily imply genocide. Clear calls for extreme violence are against our terms of service and will result in suspension. And he was responding to a guy named Colin Wright, whose profile you see over there on the right side of the screen. And he's an evolutionary biologist and somebody who's been very active in the battle against gender ideology, making the point that there's a clear biological distinction between males and females, and you can't change sex, and all the implications of that in terms of safety and privacy for women, and not trying to convince people that if they're unhappy in part because of gender identity issues, that the way to address that is through medical procedures. So he's done a great job of debunking that. However, I've discovered that his politics are pretty horrible on everything else, including, in particular, the Israel Palestine issue. So he said, yes, decolonization necessarily implies a Jewish genocide. Thus, it is unacceptable to any reasonable person. Now, what? Like, as we all know, Europeans have been the primary people over the last several hundred years who have colonized the world. And so the people who were victims of this, which most recently includes Palestinians, starting in the early to mid 20th century, yeah, they've obviously not liked being subjects of the UK or the United States or France or whoever it is. And so they've fought back against that colonization. And obviously, they can do that without committing genocide and have done so. And so, but when Palestinians say they want to decolonize Palestine, somehow that is automatically twisted in the minds of Zionists into they want to kill Jews. Ridiculous. So Elon Musk implies that he's going to suspend people for using that word or using the phrase from the river to the sea, which, as I've talked about before, is, for obvious reasons, only half of the phrase is quoted because that makes it more ambiguous in terms of what it means, and they can then twist it. and imply that it means that Palestinians want to kick Israelis out of Israel or Palestine throughout the Palestinian territory. Now, it certainly doesn't necessarily mean that at all, and most people who use the phrase don't mean it that way. And so, as you can see in the image there, there's the other part of the slogan that Zionists like to leave out, making it easier to distort its meaning. But you hear this phrase, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, chanted at demonstrations for Palestinian liberation everywhere you go, where they speak English. And I've been hearing this phrase since I first started going to protests for Palestinians' rights sometime in the 1980s. And the context in which that slogan is said is along the lines of basically, look, Israel is an apartheid state. It's been oppressing Palestinians, ethnically cleansing them throughout its existence, and we want that to stop. We want a free, democratic Palestine, whether it be a two-state solution where a predominantly ethnically Jewish state that I guess they can call Israel if they want to continues to exist, and also a predominantly Palestinian state, or whether they propose, as I'd say the majority of pro-Palestinian activists do, a one-state solution where it's a secular democratic state where everybody has equal rights rather than Palestinians being second-class citizens. This was written in 2021. So this attempt to distort the meaning of the slogan didn't start just in the last couple of months or something. So Youssef Munir says, you may have heard claims this slogan is anti-Semitic or even genocidal. On May 19th, for example, the New Yorker Union was widely attacked for tweeting solidarity with Palestinians from the river to the sea who went on a 24-hour strike yesterday for dignity and liberation. Whether in earnest ignorance or in bad faith, critics of the river to the sea formulation argued that the Union and others who used the slogan last month were implicitly calling for not only dismantling the state of Israel, but cleansing the entire region, ethnically cleansing it from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea of its Jewish population. Unfortunately, the Union backed down in the face of these smears. And you might recall a few years before that, when commentator Mark Lamont Hill, who's also a professor, was forced to resign from his position at, I can't remember if it was CNN or MSNBC, one of those, because he used that slogan in the context of a commentary supporting Palestinian rights. And he was called anti-Semitic and pressured to resign from his position and apologized for using that phrase, which unfortunately he did. So Youssef says, like many Palestinians, I've long used this phrase. About a decade ago, Peter Beinart started a blog at the Daily Beast called Open Zion, aimed at bringing together a wide range of perspectives on Israel-Palestine. He invited me to participate regularly, and at first I was hesitant given the name. I agreed to participate on the condition that I could write what I wanted, and that my column could be called From the River to the Sea. As I explained to Peter, I wasn't concerned with Israel's identity crisis over whether it could be both Jewish and democratic. I was concerned that Palestinians were being denied basic rights throughout their homeland. My column, From the River to the Sea, would be focused on the unity of the Palestinian experience and how all Palestinians faced a shared struggle with Zionism, regardless of where they lived. Oh, and by the way, this article was published in a magazine called Jewish Currents. So it's a Jewish media outlet. And as you probably know, there's been massive participation of Jews in the Palestine liberation protests over the last 6 weeks. So he goes on to say, I assume it's Yusuf is a he. From the river to the sea is a rejoinder to the fragmentation of Palestinian land and people by Israeli occupation and discrimination. Palestinians have been divided in a myriad of ways by Israeli policy, etc., etc., etc. There are Palestinians denied equal rights living within Israel's internationally recognized territory as second class citizens. There are Palestinians living with no citizenship rights under Israeli military occupation in the West Bank, and there are Palestinians in Gaza living under an Israeli siege, which, as you probably know, has been going on since the mid 2000s. Since Zionists struggle to make a persuasive argument against freedom, justice, and equality for all people throughout the land, they seek instead to attack the message and messenger. When Palestinians proclaim from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, many Zionists argue that this is a Palestinian call for genocide. But as historian Mahad Nasser has noted, there's never been an official Palestinian position calling for the forced removal of Jews from Palestine. The links between this phrase and elimination might be the product of an Israeli media campaign following the 1967 war that claimed Palestinians wished to throw Jews into the sea. Jewish groups claim that the slogan is anti-Semitic because it has been taken up by militant groups such as the PLO, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and Hamas. But as Nasser writes, the phrase predates these uses and has its origins as part of a larger call to see a secular democratic state established in all of historic Palestine. The claim that the phrase from the river to the sea carries a genocidal intent relies not on the historical record, but rather on racism and Islamophobia. These Palestinians who use that phrase, the logic goes, cannot be trusted. Even if they are calling for equality, their real intention is extermination. So it's just, I mean, it is racist. It's just claiming that somehow Palestinians are such evil, dirty bastards that even though basically no colonized people that I'm aware of try to commit genocide against their colonial oppressors, even though, of course, they used violence as was necessary in order to gain their freedom, or try to. But somehow, those evil Arabs want to kill all Jews. That's what they claim. There's no evidence that this is true. Okay. Well, I'll leave a link to the article so you can read the whole thing if you want to.